Okay, let's get into it. Forget the poetry, forget the sacred romance for a moment. Today, we're taking a bit of a shortcut, really, into the most effective strategies of human influence. We're treating seduction as, well, pure, high-stakes, applied psychology. We're doing a deep dive into a pretty surprising stack of sources, historical biographies, Kierkegaard, Robert Greene, all these texts that view this whole process as a form of calculated power.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to strip away the myths. Get past the usual ideas about attraction. We want to focus on the historical archetypes and the actual methods people used and still use to gain, lasting influence. We're not really looking at emotional connection in the typical sense.
No, not the fuzzy stuff.
Right, we're looking at results, psychological penetration. You should almost think of this material as a kind of roadmap, maybe for emotional warfare.
Strong words. And
Yep.
okay, before we even get into the different types of players here, the sources lay down a fundamental rule, like a non-negotiable. If you think seduction is just some magical charisma you're born with, well, you're already off track.
That's absolutely critical. That's the starting point. The whole process, according to these texts, requires rigorous planning, detailed strategy. And it has to be aimed specifically at the target's particular weaknesses, not just general charm.
Specific weaknesses.
And the biggest obstacle, the biggest thing that gets in the way of being effective here, it's, ironically, self-absorption.
Right. Thinking about yourself.
Exactly. If your mental gaze is inward, worrying about how do I look or what do they think of me, you instantly become, well, the anti-seducer. The focus has to be outward into the target's psychology.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start with the archetypes, who really mastered this outward gaze, beginning with the siren. What's fascinating here is the claim that the siren was originally invented, essentially, by women, as a form of lasting power against men who had all the obvious social and physical force.
Yes, historically that seems to be the case. Figures like Bathsheba, Helen of Troy, Cleopatra, they understood, perhaps instinctively, perhaps strategically, that men could be made dependent through pleasure, even if they couldn't be controlled by direct force. It was, for many women in rigid patriarchal systems, maybe the only lasting power they could wield.
And the siren really masters this control. They take a typically strong, maybe even rigid masculine type, think soldiers, heroes like Mark Antony, and they transform him into what the sources actually call a childish slave.
It's quite the image.
They radiate pleasure, availability, but what's the crucial ingredient they mix in? It's not just pure pleasure, is it?
No, and that mixes everything. Pure pleasure is, well, it's easily forgotten, maybe. They mix that availability, that promise of pleasure, with a touch of innocence, a hint of vulnerability.
Ah, okay.
So the man is drawn in by the immediate gratification, sure, but he stays because he's given this critical illusion, the texts call it, that he's the protector. He thinks he's the strong one, guarding this fragile, alluring creature, when in fact she's controlling the whole dynamic through his need to feel strong, to feel useful, to protect.
Wow. Okay, that's a masterclass in subtle manipulation disguised as, well, helplessness. All right, moving on from the sirens, more primal appeal, we get the dandy. This is less about basic pleasure, more about the allure of ambiguity. Is that right?
Yeah.
Defined by nonconformity. Radical difference.
Precisely. Think of someone like Beau Brummel. Apparently, he might spend, 5 hours on his morning ritual, just crafting this persona. It's all based on meticulous, sometimes eccentric detail. The dandy intrigues people because deep down, most of us feel a bit oppressed by our own, rigid social roles.
And the dandy offers a glimpse of freedom.
Yeah, freedom through difference, through not quite fitting in, but making it look incredibly appealing.
And this appeal crosses gender lines, the sources say, because the dandy adopts psychological traits often associated with the opposite sex. How does that play into the target's narcissism?
Well, it satisfies this inherent desire we seem to have for something that both mirrors our own potential power, but also offers an edge of.
Yeah.
Maybe exciting difference. Or even danger. Take the feminine dandy, think Rudolph Valentino. He apparently seduced women partly by showing a delicacy, a poise in courtship that was often described as almost feminine.
Ah, like an attention to detail.
Exactly. He possessed this meticulousness, this focused attention that perhaps women often wished men would possess, but rarely found.
Okay. And conversely, the masculine dandy, like Lou Andres Salome.
Right, an intellectual woman who appealed to men partly by displaying this very distinct, non-traditional lack of interest and commitment, and being tied down.
So the target sees something familiar, maybe a reflection of their own desire for freedom, but it's also thrillingly unavailable or different.
Exactly. They're drawn to an image that reflects some powerful aspect of themselves. Could be freedom, confidence, sensitivity, but an aspect they often have to repress in their daily lives. The dandy embodies it.
And speaking of unavailability, that brings us nicely to the coquette. The grand master, the sources say, of delaying satisfaction. The ultimate art here isn't actually offering the pleasure, but keeping the target in this state of perpetual anticipation.
That's it precisely. The coquette never offers total satisfaction, at least not for long. They orchestrate this constant, almost agonizing back and forth. Hope, then frustration. Hope, than frustration.
Which just makes the target pursue them more intensely.
Absolutely. The target chases simply because the prize is always elusive, always just slightly out of reach.
The sources mention Josephine Baker as a prime example with Napoleon, alternating charm and indifference.
Yes, she was apparently renowned for it. She'd be charming, draw him close, and then just when he felt secure, she might turn cold. Or show indifference, sometimes even flashes of sadness or anger, which apparently only deepened his attachment.
Why? Because it forced him to re-engage.
Exactly. It forced him back into pursuit mode. He had to re-win her favor, recapture her attention. And that emotional investment in the chase itself ensures the victim stays psychologically hooked. It's exhausting, but captivating.
Okay, that covers the archetypes, the siren, the dandy, the coquette, the players in this high-stakes game. But knowing the player types is only half the battle, right? How do the sources actually tell us to breach someone's psychological defenses?
Yeah.
What are the strategies, the methods of, as you put it, penetration?
Right. Well, the most immediate strategy is really about getting past the target's natural resistance, lowering their guard. And that's often achieved through what the sources call entering their spirit, or sometimes the mirror effect.
Entering their spirit. So recognizing that most people are kind of locked in their own worlds, stubborn, maybe hard to persuade directly.
Pretty much. So instead of trying to drag them into your world, your way of thinking.
You enter theirs. You play by their rules. You adapt to their moods. You seem to enjoy what they enjoy.
And the result, it can be immediate. It strokes their deepest narcissism. I mean, who doesn't love feeling perfectly understood? It lowers their defenses because they feel validated, understood, safe. And critically, the target starts to feel like they are the one initiating the connection, like they are seducing you.
Ah, that's clever. It flips the dynamic.
It's incredibly intoxicating attention, and it just neutralizes defensiveness almost automatically.
And this isn't just romance, right? We see this in politics, power dynamics.
Yeah.
The sources mention Zhu Enlai, the Chinese diplomat.
Yes, his diplomatic charm is often cited. When negotiating with the Russians, who apparently valued methodical presentations and maybe weren't keen on admitting flaws.
He didn't argue China's case defensively.
No, he reportedly agreed the Chinese had made mistakes. He made a show of drinking their vodka, participating in their customs, and crucially, he provided these neatly drawn, systematic charts and plans, knowing the Soviet hosts appreciated that kind of methodical, almost engineering-like display.
So he indulged their tastes, their way of thinking, rather than imposing his own?
Exactly. He lowered their guard by appealing to their ego, their preferred style, and by doing so, the argument goes, he gained a far more useful treaty than he ever would have through direct confrontation or argument.
That's powerful. That strategic inversion of expectation. And the next strategy seems equally counterintuitive, disarming through strategic weakness. You actually avoid that self-protective swagger we often assume is attractive.
You absolutely avoid trying to hide your insecurities, or at least you don't project constant, invulnerable strength. Instead, you subtly display certain weaknesses, vulnerabilities.
Why? To neutralize the target's own defensiveness.
Partly that, yes, and also to make them feel needed. It triggers a protective impulse in many people.
Which in turn makes the target feel stronger, superior even.
Precisely. Think of Lord Byron or maybe John F. Kennedy, both considered highly effective seducers in their time. They didn't necessarily hide their insecurities or moments of shyness. Reports suggest they strategically allowed their softer side, their vulnerabilities, to show.
Inviting sympathy or care.
Exactly, inviting the target to care for them, to protect them, almost. A man's softer side, his vulnerability, can be surprisingly effective, especially perhaps when it triggers a protective instinct in the person he's pursuing. It bypasses intellectual defenses and goes straight for an emotional response.
Okay, so defenses are lowered, maybe through mirroring or showing weakness. What's the ultimate goal then? The sources say it's about confusing desire and reality.
Yes. Clouding the target's powers of reason until they can no longer really distinguish between the illusion you're creating and the actual truth of the situation.
Making them want to believe the illusion.
Deeply. And we absolutely have to talk about the most spectacular example of this, Potemkin, and his efforts for Catherine the Great in the Crimea.
Ah, the famous Potemkin villages.
Infamous, perhaps. Potemkin understood Catherine's deepest, most secret fantasy. Not just about ruling, but about being a transformative ruler. She desperately wanted to believe she was this loving, progressive Tsarina whose vision was fundamentally reshaping the empire for the better.
So for her tour of the newly acquired Crimea, he didn't give her the gritty reality.
He gave her her ideal, embodied, pure facade. They saw these brand new looking villages, which were often just painted fronts, herds of cattle that were apparently shipped in and moved under cover of darkness to the next location. Peasants who were trained, maybe even paid, to look ecstatic and prosperous.
He wasn't appealing to her eyes then, but to her pre-existing fantasy.
Precisely. He was confirming her deepest self-belief, her secret wish for herself and her reign.
And the brilliance, or the terrifying effectiveness of it, is that she wanted to see it so badly.
That her mind filled in the gaps. She saw the facade but perceived the glorious reality she yearned for.
And nobody, least of all Catherine herself, could really admit it was fake afterwards. Because admitting the villages were fake would mean admitting her own grand vision of herself or reign might also be, well, a lie.
Exactly. It trapped her through her own desires, her own aspiration.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the dark side. The flip side of influence. If these are the seductive archetypes and strategies, what are the traits that absolutely repel? We need the anti-seducer warning.
Definitely. And the anti-seducer, fundamentally, is defined by that core trait we mentioned right at the start, self-absorption, usually combined with a pretty profound lack of self-awareness. The text outlines several types you absolutely must avoid becoming.
Okay, like who?
Well, there's the bumbler, the one who just lacks boldness or, crucially, timing. They hesitate too long or they move too fast, clumsy. Then there's the reactor, way too sensitive, prone to whining, complaining, taking everything personally. Their insecurity is repellent, not endearing.
And you mentioned this earlier too, the moralizer.
Yes, crucially, the moralizer. This is the person who takes the game, whether it's seduction or just life, social interaction, far too seriously. They fail to see it as a game often. They're constantly judging you, judging others, judging the situation against some rigid moral code.
Heavy. And not very fun.
Not at all. Look at the historical rivalry often cited between Benjamin Disraeli, who is seen as the ultimate charmer, and William Gladstone, often painted as the anti-seducer.
What was Gladstone's issue?
Reports from the time suggest women in particular found Gladstone, well, insufferable, because he apparently had no patience for a feminine point of view. He expected women, and indeed everyone, to simply see things as a man did, or rather, as he did, too serious, too rigid, too demanding of adherence to his own moral perspective.
Whereas Disraeli charmed by playing the game, making people feel good about themselves.
Exactly. Appealing to their vanity, their self-esteem, making interactions feel light and enjoyable, even if it was strategic.
Okay, so avoid being the bumbler, the reactor, the moralizer. Master charm instead.
Yeah.
Which means you also need to master the art of insinuation, especially with words.
Yes, words are powerful. The quickest way, maybe, to create emotional disturbance, to get under someone's skin, but they must be subtle. You have to avoid direct argument, direct confrontation. You appeal to the heart, the emotions, not just the intellect.
So we're talking vague language, ambiguous phrases, metaphors. Why is that subtlety so much more effective than, say, direct flattery?
Because it lets the target's own imagination do the heavy lifting. It creates space for them to project their desires onto you. Kierkegaard's character, Johannes, in The Seducer's Diary, is presented as the ultimate master of this.
How did he operate?
He rarely appeared in person, apparently. He preferred sending frequent letters filled with metaphor, poetic language, suggesting his deep desire, but never quite stating it plainly.
Keeping himself just out of reach, even in writing.
Exactly. By remaining elusive, vague, suggestive rather than explicit, he gave the target, Cordelia, the necessary time and, crucially, the space to idealize him. She effectively trapped herself, reading her own magnificent fantasies, her own ideals into his ambiguous words. She convinced herself of his depth, his passion, his uniqueness.
Falling for her own idealized image of him, not necessarily the man himself.
Precisely. She fell for the fantasy he allowed her to create.
Wow. Okay, that brings us towards the end of this particular deep dive into influence as applied psychology. We've seen the sources treat seduction less as romance, more as a high-stakes psychological game, relying heavily on understanding narcissism, the surprising power of delayed satisfaction like with the coquette, and the deliberate creation of targeted illusions, like those Potemkin villages.
Right. And I think the most profound takeaway, the idea that sort of governs everything we've discussed, is that the deepest, most lasting form of influence, it works by appealing to people's unrealized ideals.
Unrealized ideals. Say more about that, like the gap between who they are and who they wish they could be.
Exactly that. That deep-seated belief most of us have, maybe hidden, that we are inwardly greater or could be greater than we appear. Or the feeling that we could live out some thwarted ambition, some repressed secret wish if only circumstances allowed.
And the seducer provides the opportunity, or the illusion of it.
They provide the mirror in which the target sees that potential realized. Think of Madame de Pompadour and Louis XV. His previous mistresses apparently appealed mainly to his physical desires, simple pleasure. But Pompadour, she succeeded and held power for years because she appealed to his crushed ideals.
His desire to be seen as more than just a pleasure-seeking king.
Yes, his thwarted ambition, perhaps to be a great cultural leader, a patron of the arts, someone remembered for more than just decadence. She held up a mirror reflecting that aspiration. She encouraged it, embodied it, made him feel that through her, he was that greater version of himself. And once you provide that mirror, Once you give people the intoxicating belief that through you they can touch or even become their hidden, idealized selves, then the sources suggest you will have them utterly at your mercy.
A pretty compelling, maybe slightly unsettling idea for you to think about as you navigate your own world. Whose unrealized ideal might you be reflecting, consciously or unconsciously? And what kind of influence does reflecting that aspiration grant you? Something to consider. Until next time, keep that gaze directed outward.